big ball. Going for the big shot, and he hits it.
That's batted into the air, intercepted, and the Bears are going to win it.
All right, so there's a ton going on. The Bears, I guess, if you are keeping count, finally went ahead and beat a team with a winning record. Shout out to some of the subscribers on the forums on the Bear Report website that said, well, technically the Dallas Cowboys also had a winning record, as did the Commanders when the Bears beat them back in week 3 and I think 6 respectively. Welcome into the Halas Beat, brought to you by the Bear Report. Steve, Letizia, Usayd, Koshul here. You guys can check us out on Twitter at Halas Beat, at CFC Bears, and at Usayd Koshul. Steve, there's been a ton of, I think, narratives happening here as it relates to who the Bears are and what's happening. This fan base, I think, after that win yesterday has shifted more and more to, okay, maybe the 8-3 Bears are no longer a sort of joke or a team that's going to get punched in the mouth when they play a good team, because yesterday's defensive performance, or Sunday's rather, was a masterclass. But I also think that there's a lot of narratives about guys like Ozzy Trapilo and Rome Odunze. So there's a ton, I guess, to digest here.
Yeah, I think we went from, last couple of weeks being like, hey, this Bears team is fun. We'll see what happens, to now we're 8-3, and now the expectation at this point needs to be the playoffs. So it's kind of the narrative and the just on Bears Twitter has shifted from this team's fun to, hey, like we have high expectations now. This team needs to kind of turn the corner. So it's fun because Bears haven't been in that situation since 2018, where we're actually, talking about playoffs at this point of the year, not talking about our big boards. So it's really exciting, but a lot happened in that game against the Steelers. Like you said, technically the first team with a winning record, because they, like you said, the other two teams no longer had a winning record, but, a lot happened with that and with personnel, great win considering how many injuries they had, a lot of good storylines. And we're definitely going to cover my two biggest ones, coming out of that game today. So I'm really excited to talk about it more.
And again, we should mention we normally discuss 3 things when we're recording on Thursday, but when you're as busy as Steve and I, you kind of forget that Thanksgiving was this week, which is why we're recording another Monday night episode. We promise that at some point we're going to get back to Thursdays for all of you guys that love watching and hearing from us on Friday morning. But so Steve, you had put a tweet out regarding Rome Odunze, and this is something new that we're going to be doing where with every episode moving forward, Steve's going to put a tweet out from CFC Bears. He's going to say, hey, let's argue about this. We want to hear your thoughts on this. And then what we're going to go ahead and do each week is discuss some of the top replies on the show. We're going to go ahead. We're going to give you guys a shout out as well for those of you guys that do reply. But let's just get right into this thing, man. I mean, so at Exelon Yogi here, when you asked about how good Rome Odunze can actually become, what's his ceiling, where does he rank among the league's best, Sergio said he's a great route runner. If he can do on the NFL what he did in college, 50-50 balls, he can go top 5 easily. If not, he's probably wide receiver 2 the rest of his career.
Yeah, I mean, when I put this tweet out, I put it out because I was generally like kind of trying to wrap my head around it. I watched the L22 today, and I was kind of just like, what are we doing with Rome Odunze? Like, is he that top receiver that we thought we were drafting, or is he a lot further down? And I couldn't really place him. It was difficult for me. So I put this out with just genuinely curious what Bears fans thought. I know there's been a lot of talk about his drops, so I know Bears fans are a little down on him now. But I wanted to see kind of what people thought. And this was, there were a lot of replies just like this. We're not going to get to all the replies. There were a bunch of them. I can't go through every one, but I thought this was a good kind of representation of some of the tweets we got. So, yeah, I mean, he is a great route runner. He's really good against man coverage specifically. In college, he was, pretty good at 50-50 balls. That has not been the case, in the NFL. And is it a case of, just bad luck? Can he be or maybe he just needs to improve a little bit and get back to his college days? Or is it a case of he was going up against Pac-12 cornerbacks and now he's going up against NFL quarterbacks? I don't know. But I think this one was I think top 5 is probably too high. even if he starts coming down with some contested balls. Top 5, that's, that your Justin Jeffersons, that's your Jamar Chases. I don't think he's ever going to be in that territory specifically, but I think he can get into that top 15, maybe top 10 if he starts, come down to those 50-50 balls. But right now, I think he is kind of just a high-end wide receiver too, because he's getting open. I think the drops are a little bit fluky. I'm less concerned about his concentration drops where, it's just a ball that hits him in the hands and he should catch it, he drops it, and more concerned about his catch point plays where cornerbacks are able to break up those passes. That's what concerns me more. That's what separates the top 5 wide receivers from the top 15 wide receivers. So right now I do think he's kind of like a wide receiver 2. And I think with that, I want to clarify, because I think in the replies there were some different opinions on what a wide receiver 1 is versus what a wide receiver 2 is. I consider him a wide receiver 2 because I don't think there are 32 wide receiver 1s in the NFL. Just because you're the best wide receiver on a team doesn't make you a wide receiver 1. A wide receiver 1 is more just, kind of like when you're doing a draft or building your board for the draft, you don't have 32 first round grades. 32 players are going to get picked in the first round, but you might only have 20 or 22, first round grades. I would say there are probably only 15, 16, 17 wide receiver 1s in the NFL. So I put him more in that, 17 to 25 range when it comes to Rome Odunze right now. But yeah, if he does improve, I think he can climb up that list a little bit.
I mean, and that's an excellent point. I love the fact that you brought that up. I look at this team right now, and one of the things I think is really worth mentioning is just the fact that when we look at what some of the narratives are, I mean, as a general consensus, like J2K Designs here says, Rome's a good wide receiver, but there's a lot of work to do if he wants to be great. IMO, which I'm pretty sure stands for in my opinion. Now, I look at stuff like this and I kind of say, well, we have to give Rome a year, because you look at one of the reasons that he even ended up on this Bears team is, to me, not because he was Caleb Williams' best buddy, right? And again, they played at one played at USC, the other played at Washington, so 2 completely different conferences. But if there's one thing I can tell you guys about some of these top draft prospects is that they always seem to keep in touch with each other. But I do want to go ahead and mention the fact that with Rome specifically, if you guys remember, the Bears hired Shane Waldron, and Shane Waldron's background was very much like an offense built around guys like DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Well, at the time, from Waldron's perspective, you had your Tyler Lockett and DJ Moore already on the roster. And so the addition of a big guy like Rome Odunze was more so about bringing in a DK Metcalf type player to help Waldron essentially fulfill his vision on offense. Now, again, some of you guys are going to take shots at me for this, and deservedly so. I mean, I have gone on the record on this show, and I have said, well, I wasn't necessarily a major fan of the Rome Odunze pick because I would have taken like an Olu Fashanu or a Jared Verse there. But I do think that, to J2K Design's point here, the Bears are in a situation to where Rome is a good receiver. But for him to really hit that top 10 ceiling, there's a ton of work that has to ultimately be done.
Yeah, and I think that, to your point about, when he was drafted, they were trying to find their DK Metcalf. I think a lot of the conversation around Rome Odunze stems from, he's just a very different wide receiver than from what most Bear fans thought they were getting when he was drafted. We do a lot of work on the draft. There's a lot of people on Bears Twitter who watch the tape and do a lot of work on the draft. But then there's normal people who don't watch all the draft tape and just follow the Bears, who see you drafted a 6'3", 215-pound wide receiver, and you think, okay, this guy's going to be a contested catch guy. This guy's going to be a big physical receiver. And that just isn't what he's been so far in his career. He's doing other things really well. He's getting open. He's beating man coverage. It's the catch point and the contested stuff that he's struggling with. So I think that's part of this conversation as well. Is just we got a very different wide receiver than most Bears fans were expecting to get. It doesn't mean he's bad. I was surprised by how many people replied to this tweet or quoted this tweet saying he's a bust or it was a wasted draft pick. There was a bunch like that. That I think I'm a little bit low on Rome Odunze right now, just from what I've seen, but I think he's far from a draft bust. And like you said, you could definitely make an argument they would have been better off drafting an Olu Fashanu or Jared Verse or someone like that. But he's still a very good player, and he's going to be a good player for the Bears for a long time. It's just the argument is really what is his ceiling going to be. So I think that's part of the equation as well.
Yeah, and I give Ryan Poles some credit here because he stuck to his guns and took Rome Odunze, because it's like if you take an Olu Fashanu or a Jared Verse, you filled one need on a roster that had a lot of needs, quite frankly. But then you are effectively, and the Bears had no second round pick in 2024, by the way. So then you're going into 25 with, well, we have a projected top 10 pick. Do we take a tight end or do we take a wide receiver? And then it's like if you hire Ben Johnson and you take one or the other, and we understand this is a lot of hindsight here on our part, but it's like you take a receiver, then you're not getting a Colson Loveland, then it's, well, we need a tight end. But if you take the tight end, then it's like, well, we still need another wide receiver. And so in the first round at least. And so if you were to tell me, and again, I've said this as well, that at some point the second best wide receiver on the Bears in terms of just from a production standpoint and legitimately, I think, a ceiling standpoint, as I said this last offseason, I'm going to bring it back again. When the Bears had Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and Rome Odunze, if you were to tell me that the third best receiver on this team was going to be a top 10 pick, I would have looked at you and said, what simulation or what worlds are you living in where that's the case for the Chicago Bears and the Chicago Bears as we know it? If you were to go ahead and you were to tell me that, now the third best receiver on this team was basically going to be a second round pick that for months on end was being mocked as a first round pick and even at one point a top 10 pick in Luther Burden, I still would have told you that you're crazy. So I look at this thing and I kind of say, well, there's fans like Start Kyle Orton here who say he's a solid wide receiver one. He could be a great one if he plays bigger at the catch point, which was all over his college tape and hasn't translated yet. I know it's in there, damn it. Is it safe to say that part of this is just because, much like we used the argument for Caleb Williams being a rookie and having to basically play in his second offense in his second season, it's fair to say that that's the case for a Rome Odunze as well, that he's a second-year player that's playing in his basically second offense. And to the whole concept of the catch point, I will say this from a coaching perspective, that this is an offense where, because it's built on so much pacing, spacing, and timing, sometimes the opportunities for the 50-50 balls are just not going to be there. Because a lot of people have this, I guess, preconceived notion that, well, it's a 50-50 ball. That means that you have to go ahead and, the quarterback's got to chuck it up and the receiver's got to come down with it. That's not necessarily always the case in this offense. So I think that, for Rome's skill set, he fits in this offense, but he has to adjust just a little bit more.
And I think to that point, Ben Johnson said, I believe it was last week, that he's not a big fan of 50-50 balls. His ideal wide receiver is probably a Rome Odunze type who is able to create separation and isn't reliant on making those 50-50 catches. That being said, at times you're going to have to make a 50-50, a contested catch, we'll call it, instead of 50-50, because, there are going to be times when you try to scheme a guy open and they just have a perfect coverage and you still have to throw the ball because you don't want to take a sack. So there's going to, even though Ben Johnson prefers, to scheme guys open, to have guys who could just beat man coverage on their own, there's going to be times when Caleb Williams is going to have to throw into coverage a little bit. And as of right now, and I don't want to, just pick on Rome Odunze, because I think there's, DJ Moore, Luther Burden, and all these guys, Cole Kmet, even, Colson Loveland actually been pretty good, but a lot of them have not come up strong in contested catch situations. We don't really have those plays where, where the wide receivers are just making a play on the ball when the ball's in the air and coming down with it. It's not really part of the Bears' offensive identity right now. And maybe it can be in the future. And I think Rome Odunze, with going back to, start Kyle Oren's tweet about him doing it in college. Yeah, it was on his tape in college. It's kind of like what I said earlier. Like is it something that he forgot how to do? I don't think so. I just don't know yet if it's something that he's going to be, just because he's going to be consistent in the NFL, because again, he's not going up against Pac-12 cornerbacks anymore.
All right, this one I gotta ask you about, dude. So Jay Marwitz7, aka Jackson, says I'd stack him up as a mid-tier wide receiver one, somewhere in the 15-20 range, with guys like Nico Collins and Cortland Sutton, not stylistically but impact. I think his ceiling is elite wide receiver one, like 90% of prime Davante Adams. Well, my reply to Jackson is this: is if you watched Davante Adams last night on the Rams, even though he's 32 years old, Davante Adams is still in his prime to me. And I should mention this, amongst analysts, podcasters, NFL media, there's not necessarily ever been a written universal definition of what, prime is per se. Like, what's a player's true prime? Now, if we look at Davante Adams' statistics, I do want to note this, is that the first basically 2 seasons in Green Bay, right? He had, didn't even reach 500 yards receiving. And so it's just one of those things in both years, right? So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, he had a ton of, he had 88 receptions. He essentially had, I think, just over 1,000 yards receiving during his first 2 seasons in Green Bay. And then really that, I guess, 5th season is when he got to 1,386 receiving yards, right? He was always a high volume guy. So, for perspective here, like Jackson's mentioning Davante Adams. Davante Adams came in the league in 2014, didn't have 1,000 yards until basically 2018, right? Whereas from 14 to 17, he was just under 1,000 yards every time. So do I think Rome can be on that sort of trajectory? Yes. But I also think that the big difference here is, you want to see Rome pop off earlier, to Jackson's point. And the reason being is because Davante was a 2nd-round pick, whereas Rome Odunze is a top 10 pick. So there has to, I think, be a higher, expectation for the guy that was drafted higher.
Yeah, I think if you're a Bears fan who's hoping for Rome Odunze to, take the next step, which I'm hoping is every Bears fan, but Davante Adams is kind of the blueprint, because he is a guy, like you said, he was a 2nd-round pick, so expectations were a little bit lower, but he is a guy who took a few years to really, get to where he was and get to, where he became that elite wide receiver. Now, I'll say I think Davante Adams is kind of the exception to the rule. I think most wide receiver runs, elite wide receiver runs, come into the league and are, elite or very close to it right away. I mean, look at Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Puka Nacua. All 3 of those guys came in right away and were elite wide receivers, in this league. You go. I'm kind of just going down the list. AJ Brown was maybe not elite, but really good as a rookie. Amon-Ra St. Brown was really good as a rookie. CeeDee Lamb was good as a rookie. All these guys kind of came in right away and were really good. Davante Adams is a guy who did take a few years to kind of get up and running. I will also say that Davante Adams, I think, is one of the most underrated wide receivers in the last, decade plus. I think he's never really, while everyone kind of acknowledges he's good and great, I don't think he's ever been put at like the top. And I think as a route runner and as a separator, he's one of my favorite wide receivers to watch. I'd put him in the top 5, even still, at 32 years old. So I don't know if Rome Odunze is ever going to get into that top 5 territory. I would say, as of right now, I would guess not. But I think he still has the opportunity to get into that top 10 territory, and it'd still be considered a wide receiver one.
All right, we know it's been a lot of Rome Odunze so far. We pinky promise we're going to start talking about Ozzy Trapilo in another 2 to 3 minutes here. We do want to bring attention to this one here. And by the way, it's not our intent to highlight takes that we may not agree with or that people personally may not agree with. It's just this is us creating conversation. So Not My Forte says thought we were getting Larry Fitz and got Michael Crabtree instead. So on the topic of mentioning a Larry Fitzgerald, you have to be a special player to be a Larry Fitzgerald. And the reason being is because with Larry Fitz, there were, first off, the best quarterback that I ever played with was Kurt Warner. But with Larry Fitz specifically, there were a lot of ups and a lot of downs in Arizona. But he's a guy that no matter what, still continued to produce. With Michael Crabtree, first off, Crabtree in today's league would be because he was drafted, I think, in 2010. Or 09 or 010, right around the end of 2 decades ago or the start of the last decade. But with Michael Crabtree, the big thing is that if we were playing in the modern NFL in 2025, he would essentially just be a slot receiver. He would not have been that like big X. Larry Fitz was more talented in the sense that he could play pretty much all over the place. So can Rome be a Larry Fitz type player for the Bears? Yes. But right now, I mean, I don't blame people like Not My Forte for saying, well, he's on a Michael Crabtree like trajectory, because eventually, I mean, he's going to be one or the other based on how things play out in Chicago.
Yeah, I put this one in here just because I thought it was funny. Because I do remember like there were a lot of Larry Fitzgerald comps with Rome Odunze when he was coming out. And yeah, I think that, I mean, Larry Fitzgerald, another guy who's super underrated in his career. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer now. That's a tough ceiling to put on Rome Odunze. I also think, Michael Crabtree is far from his floor as well. Like I said, I think at the very worst case scenario, the Bears have a solid wide receiver too. And I just like the Michael Crabtree reference because I was, that was like you said, 2010, 2009, whatever it was, very early in my draft, research. Even maybe before I was watching, the tape a lot. And I loved Michael Crabtree. I thought he was going to be a stud. So this one just kind of made me laugh. So I wanted to throw it in there.
I mean, hey, and listen up, guys. If we didn't get to your take, then that's completely okay. We promise we're going to be doing some more of these as time goes on. The positive is that when we do shift to, the NFL draft in a couple months here and some offseason stuff, we're going to be highlighting a ton more of your guys' stuff in terms of prospects to know, prospects to watch. There's the first 4 series that we also have here on the show that is going to be a really fun conversation. But we got to spend some time here talking about the rookie Ozzy Trapilo. And I say the rookie with a capital T because if you've listened to our other show, Picks for Polls, which I do with Andrew Freeman, I've gone on record there saying, well, next year the Bears are either taking an edge rusher or a pass rusher in the first round. For some perspective here, 5 years ago when they were going to trade up for Fields, when the Bears traded up for Justin Fields, I knew that they were trading up for him, not to toot my own horn. I knew that they were taking Darnell Wright in 2023. I knew that Caleb was going to be the guy in 24, as did everyone. But I knew, and I had an inkling, even though I personally said Fashanu or Verse, that it was going to be Rome in 24. And then last year I knew it was going to be Colson Lumlin. So I'm on a bit of a hot streak here. But I do want to mention this, is that next year the conversation for the 26 draft was ultimately going to be, is it an edge rusher? Is it an offensive tackle? Based on where the Bears are at right now, it's going to be whoever is the best player available on the board, or even corner or safety. But I look at Ozzy Trapilo's performance yesterday, cutting to the chase here after rambling. I think that Ozzy's shown enough. It's just one game. It's a small sample size, but he proved that he could be the left tackle of the future based on yesterday's performance. Now, do we need to see it over the next 6 weeks? Yes. Do we need the Bears to stick to their guns and basically start Ozzy Trapilo over Theo Benedict? Yes. But if Ozzy can be the guy moving forward at that spot, that basically makes your 26 offseason a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted when Theo Benedict was on the injury report. I tweeted out, or actually no, it was after he was declared out. It was right before the game. I tweeted out saying, "This is, you never want to wish injury on anyone, but this is actually a blessing in disguise for the Bears, because the Bears needed to see what they have in Ozzy Trapilo. Theo Benedict is not the long-term answer at left tackle. Ozzy Trapilo might be the answer at left tackle, but we just don't know. So we need to see him. So him getting the start was really good, just so we can have some tape. Well, so that when I say so, the Bears can have some tape to evaluate on, but also so that Ozzy Trapilo has some tape to evaluate himself on when he gets to the offseason. He can work with the offensive line coach Dan Rochar and say, hey, you see what you're doing here. These are the things that you need to do to get better for next year. So it just made sense in all the sense of the world for Trapilo to eventually, at some point this season, take over that left tackle spot. And it's not like Theo Benedict was a world beat, was killing it out there, doing amazing. He did a serviceable job. He was a good run blocker, pretty below average as a pass blocker. But he served his purpose. I think now with Trapilo, you start him the rest of the year, even if Theo Benedict comes back healthy. You can bring in Theo Benedict as that sixth offensive lineman to help you out in the run game a little bit, but Trapilo should be your starter going forward, so you can evaluate him. And I think it was a good first step against the Steelers. That is a tough Steelers defensive line to go up against in your first career start at left tackle. I thought he did hold his own. He got a ton of help from tight ends and running backs chipping, which is good. You don't want to just throw out your rookie left tackle who played right tackle for the last couple of years and say, hey, good luck. They gave him a lot of help, which is good to see. But he still held his own. He did have a couple reps where, he had no help and still held his own. Caleb Williams also had his lowest time to throw of the season, which is good to see. So overall, a very encouraging first start. We need to see a whole lot more before we, declare if he's, the left tackle of the future, and the Bears no longer need a left tackle. But it's a good first step to that. And over the next, how many more weeks we have left, if he does prove that he is the left tackle of the future, that is absolutely huge for the Bears. That takes one need off the board. It's a very interesting left tackle draft this year. As a guy who studied a lot of left tackles, going into the year, we thought it was going to be an elite left tackle class. Some of the guys we expected to take that next step kind of haven't. So it's kind of an interesting left tackle class where there are no really like sure things like these couple guys are going to be elite left tackles like it was kind of in the last draft. So even if they did take a left tackle in the first round, there's no guarantee that guy's going to come in and be that franchise left tackle either. So if he does kind of cement himself, and at very least buys you another year before you have to invest in that position, it still wouldn't surprise me to see them maybe bring in a vet, even if Trapilo kind of solidifies himself here over the next couple weeks. This offseason, bring in a vet, allow him to compete with Trapilo, allow him to kind of mentor Trapilo, or maybe bring in like a third, fourth round draft pick to kind of compete as well. But overall, I think it was a very promising first start. I need to see a little bit more before I crown him, but he did everything he was asked to do, and he did it effectively in the first game. So it's really good to see.
Look, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say this. I love the idea of bring in a third or fourth round pick to compete against Trapilo. But then realistically, I think the question is this, is your third or fourth rounder going to be a Zach Pickens, who I know is a defensive tackle, but again, I'm just using him as an example, a guy that never really sees the field in training camp, doesn't really have an impact? Or is it going to be a Karan Amagaji to where it's another essentially low risk, high reward? I also kind of look at this whole thing and I say, well, on the idea of bringing in a veteran, not a bad idea, but the Bears are going to have like $3 million in cap space. So they're going to have to move some money around and borrow from 27 to sort of make things work. So it's a weird situation here because, see, when the Bears had drafted Ozzy Trapilo, one of the things that he had mentioned is the fact that with Ozzy specifically, he had trained to basically play every position except for center. And I do believe that the narratives with Ozzy were kind of all over the place because when he was backing up Darnell Wright, it was, oh, well, they spent a pick on this guy and he's not starting and yada, 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 and this sucks. And, this was a wasted draft pick. So it was a lot of short-sighted narratives. But now you sort of look at the entire situation and you look at where Ozzy's at. And granted, it's only one game. It's a very small sample size, but there is a lot there yesterday. He showed that he's basically your classic, like, technician of an offensive lineman. He's basically, if you guys remember Mitchell Schwartz back in the day, he used to play for the Chiefs back in the day, as in like 8 or 9 years ago at this point, but he's basically like a Mitchell Schwartz type offensive lineman in terms of he's not the greatest athlete, but he's a good athlete, plays with solid technique, does all the little things right. I thought the hand placement and the footwork yesterday from Trapilo's perspective was really good. And then, to Ben Johnson's point in his Monday presser, the communication with him and Joe Thuney was, to me, really good. It was off the charts because you could tell that Trapilo didn't seem lost yesterday. So big credit to Joe Thuney there for helping Ozzy Trapilo out because, again, Joe's played that left tackle spot in his career. He knows how hard it can be, especially when you're going up against Cam Hayward.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought him and Thuney played off each other really well, which is really good to see, especially for a guy who's not only making his first career start, but first time playing, next to Joe Thuney as well. So, kind of like I said, I think it was an a good first start. I think there were some things he needs to clean up. He just doesn't. A guy who's 6'8", like Trapilo is, he's always going to kind of struggle with just knee bend and getting out leveraged. That's just something that's going to be hard to overcome just given his physical limitations. But there are ways to kind of mitigate that a little bit with hand usage and everything like that. So I think that I watching him in college and watching him, this game and watching him in the preseason, I don't think he's ever going to be that, top tier, like Trent Williams type left tackle, top tier left tackle. But I like the Mitchell Schwartz, thing you mentioned. He can be that kind of middle of the pack left tackle who, can put together a few years, maybe even make a Pro Bowl at one point in his career. But he's not. And that's fine. I think that solidifies the left tackle position, and I don't think you necessarily need that top tier left tackle because you might have a top tier right tackle on the other side. So if he's your worst offensive lineman or your fourth best offensive lineman, I think you're in good shape.
I'm gonna throw this out there because you mentioned the right tackle, but for those of you guys who have been listening to this show, my thoughts. Well, I do not want to hear this whole narrative of Darnell Wright moving over to the left side and then someone else taking that right tackle spot. And the reason being is because, to me, like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Darnell Wright's been the best player on the offensive line so far. I mean, and I believe it is all worth mentioning that, like, this unit as a whole, especially the interior, people were clowning on Jonah Jackson. People were high on the Joe Thuney pick. People said, or the Joe Thuney trade. People also said that Drew Dahlman was a little bit undersized to play in this offense. And they had their worries about this front five as a whole. But this is a unit that, to me, has really come together here over the last basically 6 weeks. And again, if you're like me and you're keeping track, this is the second time this season that the Bears have gone on essentially a 4-game win streak. So when we look at, where Trapilo's at and then the grand scheme of things, that, Joe Thuney's going to be here next year. Drew Dahlman, Jonah Jackson are going to be here next year. Same with Darnell Wright, which the Bears will pick up Darnell Wright's 5th-year option in 2026 to keep him under contract through basically 2027-28. But for this team specifically, it would be the first time in forever since the Matt Nagy days where they would go into a season having the basically, or I would even go so far as back to say this, not even the Matt Nagy years. It'd probably be the first time since the Lovie Smith days that the Bears would have the same starting 5 offensive linemen for second consecutive season, which would bode so well for continuity. So to me, the Trapilo conversation, it started yesterday and it's only going to heat up as time goes on, because if you can have continuity up front with that front 5, the ceiling for any team is legitimately the sky is basically the limit at that point.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't even think about that. It'd be really nice to like. I really curious what the actual last time the Bears did that is, because it might be back to the Lovie Smith time. Who knows? But that's a really good point. That continuity along the offensive line is huge. It's what good franchises do is build the offensive line up, and then re-sign your guys who are good. And kind of along those lines, what good franchises do on their offensive line is they draft guys before they need them. And I think that's what the Bears are in the opportunity to do, now this year in 2026 and 2027, because Joe Thuney, is getting older. He's not going to be here forever. Jonah Jackson, this will probably be his last contract. Drew Dahlman, Drew Dahlman's probably going to be here for a while, but to that point, it'd be nice, this offseason or maybe the next offseason to draft a guard, in the second, third round, who can kind of just come in and once Thuney, retires, just kind of slot him in. That's what good franchises do, and it's been a long time since the Bears have been in position to do that. Because to your point, the Bears have always been drafting an offensive lineman or signing an offensive lineman, so for the sole purpose of them starting right away because they need it. They don't have any other options. They're in a very unique opportunity to draft a guy, let him sit and develop for a year, and then step in when they need him. So that's the sign of a good franchise, and it's a sign that the Bears are heading in the right direction.
And again, we'll obviously have to see how it plays out. Before we get out of here, make sure you guys are following us on Twitter at Halas Beat, at Usayd, Koshul, at CFC Bears. If you watch this on YouTube, we would appreciate a thumbs up, like, comment, and subscribe to the video as well. Give us your own Rome Odunze thoughts and thoughts on Ozzy Trapilo. If you listen to the audio version of the show, give us a 5-star rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to check out the Bear Report website as well. There's a ton of activity going on there where we're having tons of discussions left and right about so many different topics. We will see you guys next week for sure. Have a great rest of your week. Enjoy Thanksgiving, and bear down, ladies and gentlemen. Enjoy the first place Bears.